Baruch Hashem. Today's daf is Menachos daf Tes, but we're going to start on the bottom of Ches Amud Beis, 6 lines from the bottom, where the Gemara tells us about the following teaching, which we already had, and we had it earlier, but we also had it in Zvachim Samach Gimel. Gemara tells us, Gufa Amar Rabbi Yochanan. First of all, big shkoch to Jeff, because it's 19 degrees outside. It's really cold, Jeff. Gufa, so on the bottom of Ches on the base, 6 lines from the bottom, the Gemara says, Gufa, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shlamim sheshachtan behechal kisherin. Now, Rabbi Yochanan says, let's say you slaughtered your carbon shlamim in the sanctuary itself, it's kosher. What's the reason why it's kosher? Because it said, V'shachatu pesach ol moed. It says in the pasuk about the kodshim, they have to slaughter it at the entrance to the tent. And we see from here, that since the main thing was to be slaughtered at the entrance to the Ol Moed, big shkoch to Hillel for joining us, that we do not want the tafel, which is the azara, to be more chamor than the ikar, which is the Ol Moed. And so therefore, for sure, if you could do it in the azara, you can do it in the Ol Moed. Now, the Gemara has a problem with this because there's a similar teaching. And there, a pasuk is cited to prove that you could do something in the Ol Moed. So why is Rabbi Yochanan citing this svarav shaloyeh tafel chamor min ha'ikar when there's a pasuk? Because the Gemara challenges from a brisa, meisvei, Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira, Omer minayin shemikifu ovdei kochavim es hazara. How do we know Rahman Hatzlan, the enemy has surrounded the courtyard of the temple? And they're shooting, Rashi says, arrows and spears into the temple, into the courtyard. And the Kohanim want to eat the karbanos. The Kohanim are allowed to go into the sanctuary to eat. They're allowed to go into the sanctuary to eat the kachi kachim and the menachos. And the source here, he doesn't say. Here, the brisa doesn't say shaloyeh ikar tafel chamar min ha'ikar, but rather it cites a verse. Tam omer ba'kodesh hakodeshim tochenu. First of all, before we go into the Gemara's asking him the question, we could just say, imagine this scenario, and we could also imagine it symbolically. If the enemy, Rahman al-Tzlan, is firing arrows at the Yidden, meaning trying to destroy our faith, trying to say that what we believe in is nonsense, we should go into the sanctuary. We should find refuge in the sanctuary itself, in the Heichal. That's where we should take refuge, in the sanctuary of Hashem. So now on the top of Tes Samar Aleph, the Gemara says, why does the Brisa cite a pasuk? Why don't they say, if Rabbi Yochanan is correct with his logic, why do them? It says in the pasuk you should eat it in the courtyard, and we do not want to allow the tafel, which is we shouldn't have the tafel, which is eating the kachim in the courtyard, be more severe than the sanctuary. So for sure it should be okay. Mar says no, they're talking about two different things. Rabbi Yochanan's teaching was about the service, the slaughtering of the kachei kachim. But now we're talking about the eating of the karbanos. It's a totally different thing. Avoda da so the Gemara says, Avoda da adam oved b'makom rabo amrina shli tafel chamar min ha'ikar. When it comes to avoda, when it comes to doing service, there, the service of a man, a person, it's appropriate for him to do the service, even though here it's a servant and his master, in the presence of his master or a rebbe. So there we can say this logic that if you could do it in the courtyard, which is farther away from your master, for sure in the sanctuary itself you could do it, which is closer, because there you're serving the master. But achila, but when it comes to eating, there, it's not the same logic. A person is ideally not supposed to be eating in front of their teacher, their master, or kal v'chomer in front of Hashem. It's just not appropriate behavior. You're supposed to be focused. And so therefore, time in the Kosev Kra, the only reason why we know you could eat in the sanctuary Because there's a pasuk, a low cost of kra. But if there would be no pasuk, well, yeah, tafel chamer mina ikar, well, amrinan. If there wouldn't be a pasuk, we wouldn't say tafel chamer mina ikar, well, amrinan. We wouldn't say it. So that the Gemara now says, the Gemara now is going to have a series of debates between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, and they're all, some of them will tie together at the end. The Gemara says, Itmar, let's say we know that for a mincha, you have to mix together the flour with the oil. Let's say this is called the balila. Let's say you did this bola, you mixed it together. This process of mixing together, you didn't do it in the courtyard, you did it outside the courtyard. So Rabbi Yochanan says it's pesula. Rabbi Yochanan says it's disqualified. Reish Lakish says it's kashera. Reish Lakish says it's okay. Reish Lakish amar kashera dochsev by yitzok oel shemen v'nasan oel levona. Because it says you pour oil onto it and then you put the frankincense. V'adar ve'vial b'nei Aaron hakohanim. And then only afterwards, only after you did the pouring of the oil and the placing of the frankincense, only afterwards does it say you bring it to the Bnei Aaron HaKohanim to do the kamitza, the kamatz, which means mi kamitza mi elach mitzvahs kahuna. So Reish Lakish says the mitzvah of the kahuna is only from the kamitza onward. We made al yitziko blilo sheksher mazar. So the pouring of the oil and the mixing of the flour with the oil and the that's also going to be kosher with a non-kohen. And umi the kahuna will buy panim. Nami will buy. And from the fact that this Bulio does not require a Kohen, it also doesn't require a courtyard. That's the extension of the logic according to Reish Lakish. For Rabbi Yochanan Amar Pesua, he says, no, if you did the Bulio outside the Azar, it's disqualified. Kivan the Asiyasa Bekli, since it needs Kivan the Asiyasa Bekliu, since it has to be made in a utensil, Nehi de Kahuna will buy. Okay, it doesn't require kohanim, but it does indeed require to be inside the courtyard for the blila. And in fact, Rabbi Yochanan, we have a brayso to support him. Tanya Kabasi to Rabbi Yochanan, Bo Azar Kshera, Chutz L'chol Masazar Psuos. We have explicit brayso that says, yeah, if the non-kohen does the blila, it's okay, but if they did it outside of the courtyard, it's disqualified. Next dispute, Inmar Mincha Shechasra Kodem Kamitza. We know that first you put the flour and the oil, you mix it in, and then you bring it to the Kohen to do the Kamitza. But let's say before the Kohen did the Kamitza, the Mincha went missing. There was some of the Mincha that went missing, and it was diminished. So at that point, what is the halacha? Can you just add to it, or do you have to restart? Do you have to start over? Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Omer, Yavi mitoch beiso v'yimalena. Rabbi Yochanan here is more lenient. He says, just bring from your house and that's okay, and add it in. Whereas Reish Lakish says, lo yavi mitoch beiso. Reish Lakish says, you cannot bring from your house v'yimalena and add it in. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, maybe mitoch beiso v'yimalena. He says, kamitza kavola. He says, the kamitza is what will establish it. As long as you haven't done the kamitza, it's not called a mincha, and therefore we don't apply the fact that if the mincha goes deficient, it's disqualified. So it's the kamitza that establishes it as a mincha. Whereas Reish Lakish says, lo yavi mitoch beiso v'yimalena kedushas kli kavile. Rabbi Lakish says the kedusha of the utensil, that's what establishes it as a mincha. And that's where you apply the principle from. That's a fundamental dispute. So Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. So Rabbi Yochanan, who says that that it's only the kamitza that establishes and not the kedusha of the kli, he challenges Reish Lakish because we know that a mitzorah has to have the oil, a log of oil that is applied to him as part of the purification process. Chaser alog. Let's say the oil went missing. Some of the oil went missing. Imachol yitzok. If it was before he poured it on, yimalenu, you could refill it in. So we see from here, it's the fact that it was missing that you're allowed to fill it in. So tiyuvta, so it's a refutation of Reish Lakish, because we see the fact that it's in the utensil is going to be enough to is not enough to give it this shame. Now, to my mind, There's a tremendous distinction between that proof and the case we're talking about. By the lug of oil, you're not waiting to do a kamitza on it, but by the mincha, you're waiting to do a kamitza. And in fact, uh, uh, the Sfas Emes writes that actually in the Torah's Kohanim, the Midrash darshans it not from this logic, but in the fact that it says who that we see from here that chaser is posel because it doesn't seem like the same case. We point out that tiyuvta, when it says it's a refutation of Rosh Hashanah, not as strong as tiyuvta. If it would say tiyuvta twice, then it would be a complete refutation. But here it's just like a half refutation. So now the Gemara says in Mar another dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Shirayim shechasru bein kamitza aktar. Let's say you have the shirayim that went missing between the kamitza and the aktara. So before we talked about the mincha were missing before the kamitza. Now you've done the kamitza, and the rest of it could be eaten. That's called the shirayim. But that can only be eaten after you burn the kamitza after the kohen burned the kamitza on the mizbeach, and before it was burned, some of the shirayim were missing. So then the question becomes: Are you able to still do the aktara of the kamitza? Rabbi Yochanan Amar makdir kol metzayin. You could still burn the kamitza. Reish Lakish says ein makdir kol metzayin. So the Gemara, Reish Lakish says you can. So the Gemara says, well, there's a dispute between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua about what happens if all of the kamitza goes missing. Gemara says, let's look at this. The Gemara says, Aliba de Rabbi Eliezer, in this dispute which we're going to get to between Rabbi Eliezer and Yoshua, Kuli Amalo Pligi. Everybody would agree that he could burn the kamitza, even though the shirayim. Some of the shirayim went missing. They're only arguing according to Aliba de Rabbi Yeshua. The Tanan. What did we learn about this? We're going to get to this. God willing on Daf Chavav. Ninmu shira or nisrafu shira or avdu shira. Then let's say all of the shirayim was destroyed. All of it was burned. All of it was tamei. Then Kamidas Rabbi Eliezer, according to the position of Rabbi Eliezer, Kishera. Then Rabbi Eliezer says it's still kosher. You don't need the shirayim to be there to do the aktar of the kamitza. Kamidas Rabbi Yoshua, but according to the position of Rabbi Yoshua, it's psua. He says it'll be disqualified. So man the pasal. So according to Reish Lakish, who says it's disqualified if some of it went missing and you can't do the aktara, you'll say Rabbi Yoshua. He says I pascal like Rabbi Yoshua. And man the mechasher and Rabbi Yochanan, who says that you can do that Torah if some of the Shirayim went missing. He says, Ad kan lo I'm Rabbi Yeshua. Why does Rabbi Yeshua say it's disqualified if it was all missing? Ella dulo ishtayer, because there's nothing left at all of ohecha de ishtayer, but where there is some of the Shirayim left, I feel Rabbi Yeshua model. Even Rabbi Yeshua would allow. So Rabbi Yochanan says, I will allow you to do the Torah of the Kamitza where some of the shirayim remains. I could even hold like Rabbi Yeshua, because Rabbi Yeshua only says you can't do it, it's disqualified, where all of it was gone. But where some of it was there, he would agree that you could burn the kamitza. So the Gemara says, and I'll prove it to you. The Tanya, there's a brayse. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Kol Azvachem B'Torah Shenishtar Me'em Kazayas Basar Kazayas Leilav Zorek Adam. It says in the Brayse that Rabbi Yeshua's position is all the animal offerings that there's an olive-sized amount of meat or chaylev, you could still sprinkle the blood. But you can only sprinkle the blood if there's an olive-sized amount left. But kechatzi zayis basar, kechatzi zayis chaylev, if there's just a half an olive-size left, then eno zorek as adam. Then you don't sprinkle it. But by an olah, I feel kechatzi zayis basar, kechatzi zayis chaylev, zorek as adam. By an olah, even though there's only a half a zayis of basar and a half a zayis of chaylev, you can sprinkle the blood because under those circumstances, because by an olah, everything is going to be burnt. And so therefore, there's no distinction between the meat and the chaylev. And so therefore, as long as you have an outsized amount of both of them. Ubemincha, and by a mincha, alpha pisha kula kayemes lo yizrov. And by a mincha, even though it's all there, you cannot sprinkle the blood. So the Gemara, before we go into why this is a proof for Rabbi Yeshua's position and consistent with Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara first says, what does this statement mean? By a mincha, even though everything is there, you can't sprinkle the blood. The Gemara asked the question on top of Testament Aleph, mincha maya vidate. What are you talking about? That by a mincha, mincha maya vidata. What are you talking about by a mincha that you're sprinkling the blood? Mincha is a vegan offering. There is no blood. So Amar Papa, no, the mincha of the Nesachim, that there is a mincha accompanying the animal offering as a Nesachim. You might have thought to say, since it's coming alongside the Zevach, I might have thought that it's like the carbon itself. And so therefore, that even if meaning to say, you might have thought that if all the meat was gone, as long as the mincha is there, you could still sprinkle the blood because it's like the essence of the carbon itself. So we say no. By a mincha, even though the entire mincha is there, you still can't sprinkle the blood if there isn't a kazayas of basar. So the Gemara says, so that's a proof for Rabbi Yochanan, because it shows Rabbi Yeshua's position is as long as there's a kedayis of basar, you can sprinkle the blood. And so too, as long as there's some of the shiraim, you should be able to burn the ketores. So the Gemara says, "Man the pasuk, Ayi Reish Lakish says Shani Hacha." No, the case of the zvachim is different than the mincha. Why? Namar Krave Rima Kohen Mina Mincha es Azkarasta. Says I have a pasuk. Reish Lakish says that Rabbi Yeshua would have a pasuk by mincha because it says the Kohen should take a mina mincha as Azkarasa Viktira Mizbecha. And so that's the pasuk. And what do we learn from this pasuk? And we darshan ha mincha, meaning to say he needs the complete mincha. Ada isa lekua mincha lo yakir. Unless the entire mincha is there, he shouldn't burn it. Well, what would Rabbi Yochanan say? Beidach mina mincha. No, when it says in the pasuk ve'irima kohen mina mincha, it means mincha shai sakfar. At the outset, when you took the kmitza, there was the complete amount. So Reish Lakish says this position of Rabbi Yeshua by Zvachim is not a refutation of me because I have the pasuk, and Rabbi Yochanan has darshan that pasuk differently. So again, Eitzvei Rabbi Yochanan or Reish Lakish. So he challenges Reish Lakish from the brayta that we cited at the top of yesterday's daf. Achlo parka, but when you have the lechem upon him on the trees, and before you remove the bezikin, which is the equivalent of the kamitza, achlo parka. Nifras lachma, the bread broke. So that's the equivalent of the bread the shirayim becoming chaser, becoming missing. And then under those circumstances, halacham pasol ve'im makir lov es habezikin. Under those circumstances, if the bread broke before you remove the bezikin, i.e., took the kamitza, then you're not allowed. The bread is disqualified, and you can't bring the bezikin. But if after you remove the bezikin, the bread broke, halechem pasal, you can't eat the bread, the kohanim can't eat the bread, but umakter of a bezikin, you could still do the aktara of the bezikin. And so that's the equivalent of Rabbi Yochanan's position, that even though the shiraim is missing, you can do the aktara. The Amar, and the Gemara finishes the price, even though it's not relevant here. Amar Abelazar will park a marmash. It's not actually removing. Even though once it came the time to do the removal, i.e. after chatzos, then it's the law, even though it wasn't actually removed. So we see from here that Rabbi Yochanan is saying, look, there's explicit teaching that if the bread was broken after the bezikin, which was removed, which is equivalent to the kmitza, the bezikin can still be burnt on the altar. So it's proof that it's okay. So Reish Lakish responds, Amalei, Hamani, no, this position is Rabbi Eliezer. This position is Rabbi Eliezer, who says, like we saw the position Rabbi Eliezer's position is, which we saw, Rabbi Eliezer says it's kshera, that even if it's entirely gone, it's kshera. So this position, this price where the bread breaks is Rabbi Eliezer. It's not necessarily Rabbi Yeshua. So Amar way. So Rabbi Yochanan responds, Ana aminocha mishnah shlema. I'm bringing you a huge proof, a complete teaching. The Amrisli as at Rabbi Eliezer, and you're answering to me with this logic that it's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer, remember he says, even if it's entirely missing, you could still burn the Haftarah. Ma'ir nifras. Why would he have to bring the example where the lechem upon him broke? Afilu sarov va'avod nami mekasher. Even if it was just entirely burnt or totally lost, Rabbi Eliezer would still say it's kosher. So it's clearly not Rabbi Eliezer from that being that distinction. So Ishtik, Rish Lakish was quiet. Gemara says, wait 1 second. Why is Rish Lakish giving up so easily? Amai Shosak. Why is Rish Lakish quiet? Leimaway. He could have brought a different distinction. He could have said, Tzibur Shani. He could have said to Rabbi Yochanan, don't ask me a question from the lechem upon him that was missing. And don't ask me a question from the lechem upon him that became chaser to a mincha that became chaser, because the lechem upon him is a carbon tzibur. And so therefore it's shani. Therefore a carbon tzibur is different. Maybe it's allowed by the carbon tzibur, even according to Rabbi Yoshua. Hold the ishtari tuma ligabayu ishtari nami chaser. Since by a communal offering we allow tuma, you can bring tuma hutra b'tzibur. It's allowed for the community. So too also we're going to allow chaseros by the community. And so that's maybe why the lechem upon him is allowed, and would even be allowed according to Rabbi Yeshua. Amar Avada Barava, what do you mean to say? Zos Someres, from the fact that Rish Lakish didn't say this answer, we see from here that he doesn't agree with that chisaron in the communal offering is like Tumah. We see from here he says that chisaron is actually comparable not to Tumah, but to a Baal Mum, to an animal with a blemish. And therefore it wouldn't work, just like you can't bring a blemished animal for the community. Rish Lakish does not agree with this idea that chisaron will be hutra b'tzibur. So Yasser Rav Papa So Rav Papa was sitting there and he told over this idea that Rabbi Yochanan challenged Rish Lakish from the Brisa, where we see that the Vizikin can be brought where it's broken, proves he's right, and Rish Lakish didn't respond. Chaseros, that is different. That the Rish Lakish didn't respond. That's the communal offering, and he was quiet. So he was repeating this whole teaching. And Amalei Rav Yosef Bar Shemaya or Rav Papa. So Rav Yosef Bar Shemaya said to Rav Papa, "What are we talking about? Milo askinan to Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish b'minchas ha'omer d'tzibur upliki. Why do we assume that they're only talking about a private mincha? They could also be talking about a communal mincha of the Omer." And it's possible that it went missing after the Haftarah, and they still argue in that case. So that's why Rish Lakish didn't give that answer. So that's why I didn't give that answer. So the Gemara says, what's the source for Rish Lakish's position that if it went chaser after the Kemitza, it's disqualified? Amar Malkio Tana Chada. So Ramalkio says, one brisa taught misalta. It says in the pasuk misalta, which teaches us shem chasra kolshu psula. That if any amount is missing, you cannot do the Haftarah. Mishamna shem chasra kolshu pasul. That if any amount of the oil is missing, it's not going to be allowed to the mincha will be disqualified. Or then under those circumstances, we'll see what it means there, psula. So the Gemara says, V'tanya idach, and then there's another brisa. So there's another brisa, says Rav Malkio, V'anoseres min ha-mincha, that whatever is left over of the mincha will be kodesh, meaning to say that you can eat. Whatever is left over, Aaron and his children can eat. Meaning to say only the mincha, if it's a complete mincha, pratla mincha shechasri, but not if it's a mincha that became deficient, shechasar kumtza. And so therefore, we're excluding a mincha that was missing from its komets, and also shol hiktir milvonas akum, and also mincha where the lavona was not brought. So okay, Rashi shows where we learn it from. So the Gemara says, "Trey cry bechaseres lamali." The Gemara says, "Why do we need two drashos to teach us about a mincha that went missing?" The first brisa uh, um, is tells us misaltal mishamnat, and the second one is teaching us from mina mincha. Trey cry bechaseres lamali. Rav, isn't one teaching us chadl mincha shechasra kodem kamitza? Isn't the first price of teaching us where mincha that went missing prior to the kamitza, that's disqualified? And so isn't it teaching us that both cases is a refutation of Rabbi Yochanan? Because the first case, Rabbi Yochanan allowed a mincha that went missing prior to the kamitza. He says you bring another one from your house and fill it in. And the second one is Rabbi Yochanan says that if it went missing after the kamitza, he says you could still do the you could still burn the kamitza. The Gemara says no, that's not what we're referring to. Chad mincha shechatra kodem kamitza. The maybe me base of himolena in vilo low. No, the first one is teaching us. Yeah, if the mincha went missing before the kamitza, you can bring in more flour from your house and add to it. But if you don't, it's not good. And chad l'shiraim shechatra ben kamitza la'aktara. Then the second one is the afagav the matir komatzalim osan shirayim asrim machilon. The second one is teaching us, yeah, you can burn the shirayim, but you still can't eat the mincha. And the Gemara says the bio the Ledivri Omer, because the Gemara said we had a question according to Rabbi Yochanan who said Shirayim Shachatzu ben Kmitza Torah Makter Komatalian. Even according to Rabbi Yochanan who says that Shirayim that went missing prior to the Kmitza, the Aktar of the Kmitza, you can bring the Kmitza for them. Osan Shirayim, I am biachila. Can you eat those Shirayim? And about that, we've assumed the whole time you can't because we learned already the end of the Gemara. Amar Ziri, Amar Krav, Anoseres, Vilanoseres, Minanoseres. Meaning to say you could eat the Shirayim, but not if the Shirayim are not all there. Rabbi Yanai Omar Mina Mincha. Mina Mincha Shai. He says, no, you can only eat it if it was complete, but not if it was now missing, then you can't eat it. So, okay. Kamatz besmall. We said in our Mishnah that if you did the kamitza with your left hand, it's disqualified. But Rabbi Ben Beseira says you could go back and do it again. So Minah and Emili, what's the source for the idea that kamitza with your left hand is disqualified? Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Kra. It's based upon the fact that the pasuk says Vayakreves and Mincha, Vayamale Kapo Mimena. Meaning to say that he should bring the mincha and he should fill up his hand from it, meaning to say that he should do the kamitza in his hand. I don't know if this is the right hand or the left hand. When it says by the carbon of the mitzora, when it says there, that the Kohen should take from the oil and he should pour it onto the left hand of the Kohen. So the pasuk is telling us that you need two kohanim. Basically, the mitzora is coming to be mitayar. He brings a chatas and oil and asham. In addition to that, he has to bring this lug of oil. And what does he do with this lug of oil? One Kohen takes the lug of oil and he pours it into the hand of his friend, his left hand. And then the Kohen who poured it dips his right finger into the oil and sprinkles it 7 times towards the Kodesh Kodashim, and each one he does a new dipping in the oil, and afterwards he comes to the Mitzora and he puts it on the exact place where the blood was, on his right ear, on his right hand, right thumb, and on his right big toe, and the rest the rest of the oil that's in his hand, he puts it on the head of the Mitzora, and the rest of the log of oil is given over to the Kohanim. So anyway, going back to our text here, it says here, I don't know that the kamitza from what hand it has to be. And well, let's bring a proof from the oil. It says he puts it in the left hand. So kansmo, it's meaning in that case specifically, in that place specifically, it's the left hand. But kol makom shenemar kaf einu el yamin. But in all other place, it has to be a right hand. Gemara says, "What are you talking about? V'amibayla gufe? Don't we need this to teach us? Don't we need it? Don't we need this itself to teach us that the Kohen specifically collects the oil in his left hand and not in his right hand?" The Gemara says, "No, small sachrinik Stevie." No, that there is another pasuk that tells us that. It says, "V'tavo kohen atzbo a minute when Hashem nasher al kapo asmolis." So it says smolis twice. The Gemara says, "Ve'ima ein miud achar miud el rabos," but maybe that's coming to tell us we have a limitation after limitation. That's coming to tell us that since the Torah limits it twice, that means to tell us that you can even do it on the right hand. The Gemara says, no, there's a third one, small sachrina ksiv, because it says. It says, "Umina shemen yitzok hakohen al kaf hakohen hasmolis." Kan smolis ve'in achar smolis. Meaning to say, here is the left hand, but by the mincha you can't be done on the left hand. Me'im adarabit. Maybe just the opposite. Makan smolis af ba'al manami smolis. Maybe it's teaching us just the opposite. Just like here's the left hand, also in general. Versus actually, there's another smolis. Arba smolis. Stevie, there's a fourth time where it's written smolis. Trey. Ba'ani utrei ba'ashir. Two by the Bensora who's rich, and two by the Mitzora who is an ani. The Mitzora is an example of a korban olav of the Mitzora Ashir brings two sheep for the Asham and for the Ola, and one female sheep for the Chatas. So there twice it says the word hand by the right and twice by the left. So by the Mitzvah of the Ani it says Visa Kohen Metzbo Yaminis Min Hashem Nashar Kapola Smalis. So from all this we learn that only by the Mitzvah is it in the left hand, but by the other places it has to be specifically in the right hand. Because if the Torah was trying to say that every place where it says kaf it means the left hand, it would have been enough for just 3 times. So the Gemara says. We'll stop here. Today's daf. We'll continue this, God willing, tonight, Baruch Hashem, or at 8 o'clock. Yeah, Baruch Hashem.